Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories pertaining to the debate. I know for any of you who have listened for a while, this is not surprising. We are political junkies, or at least I am. So, of course, we're going to be talking about the debate. What issues Kamala could win on, what issues Donald Trump can win on, where they can really hit hard, and some advice coming in from previous debaters who have gone up against Mr. Trump. And, of course, we went today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, who do you think is going to come out on top? With some of the new rules in place where they're not going to have the mics on, there's going to be, I don't want to say less formal because it's not necessarily true. I would actually say some of the rules are making it more formal, but less in line with what we are used to in a Trump debate. Because remember, we've only had one debate previously that is even close to this format, and it was the one where Joe Biden basically stole the entire show because he was not doing so amazing on that stage. Now there's someone who, whether you like her or not, is much more competent than Joe Biden. So it's going to change the dynamics here. Who do you think is going to come out on top? I have my theories. Of course, we'll get into them, but throw your comments down there in the comment section. Love to hear what everybody has to say. All right, so with that, let's jump into our first article. It comes from the Wall Street Journal, The Presidential Campaign Proposals Americans Like Best. And you may be thinking, Alex, why are we starting here? Because we need to understand the issues that each person has an advantage on going into the debate. Because if you know ahead of time that Donald Trump is really going to focus on his tax credits or the different tax programs they want to put in place to help businesses and the different tariffs he wants to put in place in order to limit the amount of countries, in his words, quote, ripping us off, then you know the framing that he wants to take throughout the entire thing. You know the issues that he thinks he's strongest on and how he's going to continually pivot back to his issues. Versus Kamala Harris, she's sitting there saying, cost of housing, the ability to raise a family in the United States, all these, or corporate price gouging, all these different elements she feels she's stronger on, or at least we'll learn as we go through this article, and then we'll constantly see her pivoting back to it. Because when looking at a debate, obviously, the whole idea is to sell your message. Anybody who knows anything about political debates knows that much. But if you're just coming in as a random observer and you have not been following the front half of everything, of all the different proposals, all the different walking back, all the different interviews that they either have or have not done, then the issues that the candidates can return to repeatedly and really try to emphasize are the ones that you're going to walk away thinking are most associated to them. So for those of us who are paying attention a little bit ahead of time, we can actually understand what they're going to focus on, and then we can see how good they are at actually pivoting. Because there's kind of a metagame here. For people that aren't that involved in politics, the issues are extremely, extremely important. You come in and the candidates are constantly trying to get back to what they feel resonates the most with people when they speak about it. They're trying to get back to those topics in order to talk to that layman voter. For the metagame, for people who are truly involved in politics and already know to some degree what's going on, how they pivot back to it, how they turn their enemies' talking points into their own beneficial talking points, or how they how they spin in the situation, how they deflect, how they dodge, how they dip, dive, and dodge, if you know that segment from our previous podcasts. When you see those sort of things and how they're able to actually maneuver on that stage and get away from something that may be a potential trap for them and get into an advantageous position, that is something that people who constantly observe politics like to see. And you may be thinking, well, it's just because they want their person to win. It's a better way to get back to the message. You're not going to get bogged down. That's true. For the people that are already bought in and are full partisans and they want their person to win, yes, that will help. But also for even the political junkies who are not necessarily 100% behind any person or not, that ability to dodge, that ability to fade away from some of the punches and actually change the situation, use your opponent's momentum against them, that is something that I actually appreciate in my leader. I would want someone who's able to take hard questions from a adversarial media organization and spin it back onto their talking point, whether that be here in the United States or whether it be across the world. Imagine that we have a president at a UN summit and there's an organization there who is not necessarily friendly to the United States and asks a really hard question, and you have a commander-in-chief who's up there and can't even pivot away. They can't even answer the question in a way that actually redefines what the issue is and make sure that America looks strong while doing it. That is embarrassing. I want a leader who can do that. So that's part of the meta game. It goes beyond just repeat the issues, but show your skill and your ability to actually craft a narrative and also reshape the opinions of other people by reformatting what they're trying to use or show as your weaknesses and turn them into your strengths. So, like I said, there's the base level and then there is the meta level. That's why we have to understand what each candidate believes is their number one issue, because then we can actually watch as they start to pivot back to their talking points. So, let's go on here. There's actually a beautiful little chart. I'm going to go through just 3 randomly, and I think these are probably some of the most important. They're also the ones where people have the largest margin. So actually, I'll do 2 for each person. So where Kamala Harris has the largest margin is on cap insulin prices at $35. Overall, in her own base, in the Democratic side, 96% of Democrats are happy with that, and 75% of Republicans are happy with that. So that's a message that she can hit home that's going to please a lot of people. 75%, that's 3/4 of the Republicans, which means moderates are probably a little bit higher than that, honestly, depending on their ideology. Then again, I am extrapolating there. The poll does not identify a moderate group and give us polling information for them. The next one that is most popular in her base for Kamala Harris is cap out-of-pocket spending on prescription drugs to $2,000 per year. There's another polling question they had, and it is 95% of Democrats thinks Kamala Harris is actually going to be able to do this. This is a proposal that is good, and the Republican side, it's not necessarily as high, but it's about 60%. That's pretty good. I'll be honest, that is a cross-politics kind of issue right there, especially when it is truly strong with your base, because you want to make sure you're getting them out, and then you're proposing something that will allow you to best reach across the aisle and snag some people away from Mr. Trump. So, what about some of Mr. Trump's more popular ones? Impose a tariff of up to 20% on all imported goods. You're looking at about a 68% for Republicans, which is even that high is honestly surprising considering the free market nature of the previous Republican Party. But then you see the number that makes a little bit more sense on the Democratic side, which is about 29%. That one does not necessarily look so good for Mr. Trump. Now, what about the one that he proposed at the very beginning, then that Kamala kind of took off the table and said, actually, I'm going to do it too? The eliminate taxes on tips for service workers. That is an 85% approval from Republicans and a 76% approval for Democrats. And honestly, that's very impressive because that is pulling the Democrats along to at least a message that has definitely been one that the Republicans want to keep pushing, and within my generation has definitely come to define the Republicans. If you think about Republicans, one thing you can always think about is they want to lower your taxes. They don't want the government taking as much money from you. That is something they constantly talk about. So the fact that you can drag along Republicans and Democrats on this one and have such a high approval ratings between both of them, that's also a reason, in my opinion, that Kamala Harris tried to take this one off the table and said, you know what, I like that proposal, I'm going to do it. And it was funny. When people got outraged, the Republicans who were like, this is a really good idea. And then they got outraged when Kamala Harris came in and did. They're like, oh, she is stealing his ideas. And I sat back and said, I mean, yes, she definitely is stealing his ideas and pretending if she goes out and says, oh, I came up with this on my own, she is definitely baloney, this is malarkey. But at the same time, if it's a good policy and you want it to happen anyway, that's good. Donald Trump shifted the Overton window on this issue. He brought the Democrats along on this one. And the fact that their candidate said they want it now allows them to have a permission structure to say, yeah, you know what? 76% of us are okay with eliminating taxes on tips for service workers. So you can see on this front, on the economic front specifically, there are lots of different proposals that actually split both ways, except maybe, Trump's 20% tariff or the first-time housing credit for home buyers. That one is 80% approval for Democrats, but 20% approval for Republicans. So there are some that don't necessarily jive, but all of them on the top of this chart. Also, if you want to go see this chart, check out the link in the description below, the like and subscribe button. All of them will be down there. You can see this chart here. Everything on the top half is not necessarily super divided. You have almost 50% or more of either side going and saying, yeah, you know what? I could actually see this policy be beneficial for not just me, but the American people. So what else does this article say is going to be beneficial for either candidate? Quote, the rollout of new economic plans, which the two candidates have ramped up in recent weeks, is designed in large part to persuade voters that they will fight for their interests. That has been an effective strategy for Harris in particular, who has narrowed Trump's lead as the candidate who voters see as best able to handle the economy, and now is at parity with Trump when voters are asked if either candidate will stand up for American workers, journal polling shows. So, this is a really important one as well. The union side of the issue, or the American workers part of the issue. That's why this quote is in here specifically. Because for a long time, Donald Trump was seen as the man standing up for the common American. Whether you agree with him or not, whether you agree with that way of summarizing his movement or not, I think even the mainstream media, even the Democratic elites could definitely agree, because they said all these, and I don't want to say that they're just out there saying every single person that voted for Trump is dumb, but they definitely derided a lot of these non-college educated rural voters, which I'm not saying all uneducated people are union workers or they're hardworking manual labor types. There are plenty of entrepreneurs who didn't get college degrees, but in general, there was a certain segment of the population that was working hard. They were part of unions. They were part of the working class. They were blue collar. They didn't go to college because they couldn't afford to. They had to help their family out. And that's who Donald Trump was able to pull into the Republican side of the aisle. And then you start to see a little bit of a chipping away of that with Joe Biden, who has always seemed to be in touch to some degree with the union movement, even though he was definitely the senator for big business, coming from Delaware, where everybody goes to help with their tax status and everybody incorporates there and big banks and everything like that. But Biden was able to chip away at that, and he also had some very pro-union policies. I would say that under his administration, we have seen the rebirth, and if it is not strangled in the crib by whoever comes out next or by their own actions, the union's own actions, this could be a revitalization of unions. Trust me, I work with people who are of my generation and the younger part of my generation who are going through college a lot, and I am not ever surprised when I see Joe Biden's policies and then I see the response from people who are within college, because I'm never surprised to see them go out and say, yes, more union labor, more, centralization of the power of labor in unions. That's probably the simplest way to put some of their complex arguments. So there is a possible revitalization of this union power. And the unions used to be on the side of the Democrats. I would say even the top brass at unions still, for the most part, fall in line with the Democrats because they feel like they have a welcome home there, and they have for so long. And Trump was able to chip away at that in the past, and now we're starting to see a little bit of a shift back as the pro-union policies, even though Mr. Biden did actually basically completely trash the rail workers' strike, which was a big blow to the unions. But at the end of the day, most of his policies, I mean, he was even in Michigan, it was 3 days ago at this point. He was there at a union training ground. So yeah, he is definitely a pro-union president. And whether Kamala Harris likes it or not, she is a part of his administration. So some of that rubs off. She wants all the good things to rub off, like, oh, look at all the things we did for unions during our policy. But during our term in the Oval Office, or at least while I was at the Naval Observatory and Joe was in the Oval Office. But then when it comes to other things, such as economic policy, inflation, she's like, well, that's Bidenomics, but at the end of the day, that was outside our control, and we didn't necessarily do every single thing wrong here. And, she wants to take credit for the good things. She wants to leave behind the bad things, blame it on other things, which, fair enough. If you're campaigning, I understand. You got to do it. You got to protect your reputation. You got to make sure that you survive out of everybody. But it is just absolutely hilarious for me because it's a little bit of a flip-flop there. But that doesn't mean that it is necessarily going to hurt her. Just because she may be flip-flopping, she wants credit for the good things and not for the bad things, it doesn't matter. Because guess what? the unions aren't going to look at her and say, well, you kind of flip-flopped on this, that, and the other. They're going to say, no, I trust her and believe her when she says that she wants this pro-union policy. She wants the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, to be stacked with more pro-union people and less pro-big business people on it, because there is a semi-record there. People are going to selectively take and choose what they want from each candidate and try to craft a beautiful message around what that person will do for them. And you may be thinking, well, I don't know, Alex, can you really ignore? Yes. I'm sorry. The American electorate is very good at ignoring things that they do not like. All the people that love Kamala Harris will not go back and look at her flip-flopping on certain progressive issues. They will not look at her hard on crime times in California. Remember when Tulsi Gabbard pointed that out on the stage? And then guess what? It was quickly thrown away. After she was gone and she was put on the vice presidential ticket, it was never brought up by the Democrats again. It's not brought up as a concern from anyone that I've talked to. Then again, I can't talk to everybody, and there are a wide range of people, so obviously I'm making a overall generalization. But the establishment definitely does not want to bring it up. And then anybody that loves Trump, they'll just go about dismissing some of his comments, some of his outrageous things about tariffs, about a 10% tariff on everything. They will just look past it because they'll say, the time underneath Trump was economic, prosperity. It was a time where taxes were lower, and they can craft the message of the person. Okay, so I've gone a little bit off road here, but I want to both synthesize what I'm saying now, which is the American people are very good at ignoring the information that they don't like and hearing what they want and bringing it back to the debate. That is why the candidates need to know these issues ahead of time. Everything I just talked about, plus the other polling data, they have to look at it. They have to know where they're not just resonating with their own base, but they're resonating with everybody. And they need to repeat, because all it takes for that one union voter, and I'm making it a little simple here, all it takes for that one union voter is to hear three pro-union policies that will end up helping them at the end of the day, and you are more than likely to have that vote banked. All it takes for that small business owner who's really fighting right now underneath the inflation economy, underneath not necessarily higher taxes, but the fear of higher taxes in a Kamala Harris administration, because she wants to repeal, and her and the party, not just her, it's literally not just her, it's also the Democratic Party, want to repeal the tax era cuts. All he needs to hear is 1, 2, 3 about why Kamala Harris is going to be bad, what Trump's going to do for him, and how Trump can bring back prosperity. All he needs to hear are those 3 things, and then he will more than likely be voting for Donald Trump. And obviously, I highlighted a very specific situation there. I'm not saying all small business owners, obviously not. But my point being that each person who does have some sort of leaning or has one particular issue that they are extremely passionate about, all you need to do is hit that talking point once or twice. And the people that are most passionate are the ones that you have to resonate with, and they're also those issues that people are most passionate about, they're most likely to show up in some of these polls that I've been talking about, whether it go from abortion, whether it go from tax cuts, whether it go from provoking/insulating China from being able to expand, whether it be Russian interference. Any of these issues, people are very passionate about, therefore they're willing to be polled on them, and you get very, very strong responses in all of these different polls. Those people, all they need to hear is those 3 magic phrases, those 3 ones that get you in line, that tell you this person cares about what I'm interested in. And that is why this sort of information is extremely important going in ahead of time. I'm not saying that either campaign is looking at this Wall Street Journal poll and saying, oh my gosh, we found the secret key. Oh, yeah, we got it. 100%. This is how we win. They have their own internal polls. They have their own internal metrics. But you know that they are sitting there saying, okay, which issues do I need to spin to? How do I get away from this one? Because you know that Kamala Harris is going to not want to talk about immigration. Trump's going to bring it up and ask her, why didn't you do this on the border? She is coming up with plans to spin away. And that's another thing. We know that she's coming up with plans to spin away. So if she's really bad at spinning away, even after she came up with plans, that shows you a lot. And vice versa. when we're talking about the inflation, whether we're talking about the housing costs, whether we're talking about greedflation, whether or not you think it's actually happening, Kamala Harris is going to say, what would you do to the big corporations, Donald? Because you gave them a massive tax cut. We're trying to actually get it back up to a 28% tax rate instead of 21% tax rate for these large corporations so they can't rip off the American people. What do you have to say to that? And he's going to sit down and he's trying to come up with a good response. And if he can't get away, if he can't warm away well after thinking about it, because he has a team just for that issue alone, then that also says a lot. So watch out. Go read some polls directly before the debate tomorrow, because I'm recording this on Sunday. This will come out on Monday. The debate will be tomorrow, aka Tuesday. Go read some polls about the most critical issues and see how they line up throughout the debate, because it will be fascinating, I promise you. If you start looking at the meta game of debates and not just the frontal value of who owned who said that, when you start actually caring about some of the issues and how these politicians handle it, one, you gain a little bit of appreciation for what they do, but two, you can see past the surface level game where they're just trying to keep your attention and give you those three phrases, because you don't just want to hear that they care about those issues, you want to see that they're able to actually sell the message. And I think that is extremely important. But then again, that's just me as a layman sitting on the sideline. So let's go to another New York Times poll. This one, Trump and Harris neck to neck after summer upheaval, Times Siena polls find. And honestly, these polls are very interesting. They have them broken down through the big swing states. You have Wisconsin, and so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to list all of them, and I'm going to say how much the person who's up by is up by. That's all. I'm not going to list the numbers for every single one. Wisconsin, Harris up 3. Michigan, Harris up 2. Pennsylvania, Harris up 1. Nevada, tied. Georgia, tied. North Carolina, tied. Arizona, tied. So you can see things have definitely shifted since Biden dropped out. And obviously, this is not the only poll out there. Times Siena even has a nice little chart here telling us they are the only one that actually has Trump up by 2 overall after factoring in all the different electoral possibilities. But I want to actually talk about this chart that's a little bit lower down. And this is the issues that the candidates have the higher percentage of trust on. So actually, let me just read the description of you. Quote, regardless of how you might vote, do you trust Kamala Harris or Donald Trump to do a better job on each of the following issues? And then it has red and blue to do Harris for blue, red for Trump. So on abortion, candidates, they trust the candidates. Harris, they trust her about 54% to do a better job. On Trump, 39%. So that is a 15-point gap on the abortion issue. So guess what? Kamala Harris is going to hammer. She's going to get it back to freedom. That is another message that she absolutely loves. Because guess what? That message works perfectly. As I've described many times, I even said it in last week's episode when I was actually ragging on the polls. And that's why I'm not necessarily focusing on the data polls like, oh, who's going to win which state, but rather the issue polls, because that's salient. And when people at least have some understanding of the issue, rather than who they're going to vote for, but at least have some understanding of the issue, I feel as though that's more likely to be accurate information than to say, oh, who am I going to vote for, when that can very well change, versus normally people's, opinions about issues are pretty boiled in, especially some of these bigger ones that we're going to, the 4 big ones that they have listed here. So that's why we're focusing on these, even though I hit on the polls last week. But what I was getting at is that when we look at these sort of polls overall and we ask who's going to be more trusted, Kamala or Donald Trump, that she is going to continually come back to the freedom to do X argument when it pertains to abortion, because American people do not like the government involved in their life. And let's be clear, I understand we do have a very extreme / overbloated welfare system nowadays. I'm not trying to pretend as though that is not the case. What I am getting at specifically is whenever you poll Americans on issues and you frame it as the government is trying to take something away from you, more than likely, even if you have people who are already ideologically divided on this, you're more likely going to be able to pull people away, because simply the statement that the government is trying to take something from you, the government is trying to do something to you, is embedded in the poll. And that is because we are a people that does not trust authority. Even though we do love authority to give us things, we also don't trust authority when they tell us we can't do things. That's why spinning it as a freedom to choose what you do with your body thing for Kamala Harris when she came out within the first 2 weeks of her campaign was absolutely brilliant, and that's why it will resonate. And you know she's going to hit on it during the debate. So what about the next main issue? The New York Times has it listed as democracy. And who they trust on fixing democracy, saving democracy, however you want to frame it, is 50% for Kamala Harris and 45% for Donald Trump. So honestly, they could both hit on this one and it wouldn't necessarily do too much one way or the other. But then you move on to the two other ones that I think obviously anybody who's been paying attention knows that these are the two that Donald Trump is going to love to harp on. Immigration, which they trust Trump on 53 to 43 for Kamala Harris, which honestly is surprising considering when there were certain polls where Biden's immigration numbers were down to like 35. Then again, that was like the lowest it had ever been. So obviously there's been a little bit of a shift as Kamala Harris has come in, but that's still impressive on her part to get 43% of people trusting her on it. And you can honestly make a pretty solid argument from her point of view, which is I was tasked to go down there and address the issue at the border. I saw it firsthand. We weren't able to get much done during Joe Biden's presidency. I'll be able to get it done during mine. Then again, it also runs with the counter narrative that she was the border czar and she didn't do anything. So maybe that's not the way that she wants to go about it, but she can still leverage that experience of interacting with these other countries to having these different conversations and saying, I know that this is something that resonates with the heart of every single American, and I understand that it is also something that our allies down to the south want to help us address. And I've had these conversations, so she could leverage that one, and maybe that's why it's at 43%. I found it shocking, genuinely, that her number for immigration is higher than for the economy. The economy is the other one that Donald Trump is obviously going to come back to. And the trust for Kamala on this versus immigration, so if she has 43 for immigration, she has 42% for the economy. And then Donald Trump has 55%. It doesn't surprise me that his numbers are that high. It surprises me that her numbers are genuinely that low. Because this means that either one of two things. One, there could be multi-factors here, but in my mind, there's one of two things. One, people do not trust the Democrats on the economy, period, full stop, so it doesn't matter who they would have subbed in for it. Or the other one is people are genuinely associating her with the Biden-Harris administration and saying, well, she's been out here touting Bidenomics, so why isn't anything changing? We don't trust her on the economy. There's also a world where maybe you can make an argument that people are sitting back and saying she's just offering to give us free stuff. How does that actually help the economy overall? I think you could make that argument. I think it falls a little bit flat because people, when they hear that the government's trying to help them out, they may not necessarily trust the government to do it, but they have a real life example when the government did it during COVID and they did get those checks. And then again, it resulted in inflation, but they do have the recent memory of the government being able to step in and give them some relief. So when she proposes these sort of things, I don't necessarily see where the disconnect is, why she wouldn't necessarily have a better economy, unless one of the two things that I had mentioned before, which is she's being tied to the Biden administration, which is totally fair, or it could be actually both of them, or they just don't trust the Democrats on the economy. Because the fact that her numbers are better for immigration than the economy, maybe it has something to do with the fact that more Democrats are actually saying they trust her more on immigration because they don't necessarily think she'll take the hardline approach. That is also a possibility. They are different issues, so to pretend as though that their percentages are necessarily corollary is idiotic. But I just thought it was absolutely fascinating. So of these four issues, you know that Kamala Harris is probably going to lean into abortion. I don't necessarily think she's going to take the democracy dies in darkness line like Joe Biden. That was his message, and I don't think it'll be effective for her. But she could at least harp on that a little bit, and Trump is going to come back to the economy, and she could have a valid argument about price gouging there. I know that there are economists on both sides who have made the argument for the price gouging and it also being just a overprinting of money, even though overprinting of money is more than likely the largest cause. There definitely have been some studies that have argued there is greedflation going on, but I don't necessarily know if her shooting that in there, it may help a little bit with the base, but I don't know if it'll help everybody else because That's not necessarily how they look at it. They don't necessarily look at Walmart and say, oh, you greedy corporation, you're taking everything from us. Maybe some people do. A lot of people are saying, well, hey, if it was just Walmart stealing from us, then I wouldn't see prices up everywhere. But it's not just in Walmart. So just blaming the corporations doesn't necessarily quite make sense, even on the supply side of things, at least for the average American, because they can see it something more systemic than just corporations taking advantage. Because even if you go to your local small town businesses, prices are up there too. So what's our last article? Our last article comes from the New York Times. So we had a Wall Street Journal, a New York Times, and a New York Times. And I don't want to give the New York Times too much time on this one, but I thought it was an interesting little quick article. The headline reads, Hillary Clinton has advice on debating Trump. Can he be rattled? Or more specifically, I read that backwards, he can be rattled. So Hillary Clinton, she's gone up against Donald Trump. Here's what she had to say when the question was asked. The question was, quote, what advice do you have for Kamala Harris as she prepares for the debate to debate Trump? Quote, she's proven to be a good debater, both in her races in California and in her debate with Mike Pence. So I think she needs to be prepared enough that she feels really comfortable going on both offense and defense against Trump, because there's a lot to cover with him. And they go on to say, have you talked with the Biden / Harris team? Because it was the Biden team, now it is the Harris team. Have you talked with them about it? She goes on, yes, I've talked with them a little bit, not necessarily general strategy, just the things that I did before, not policy specifics, blah, blah, blah. And I just found it absolutely hilarious that you can, and Hillary Clinton even brags here. She said, well, most people would say that I actually won the 3 debates against Donald Trump. That was kind of the consensus. And maybe that's fair enough. Maybe you are right. Maybe she indeed does feel, and she's right, that she won those debates. But did she win the election? Are you really going to take advice from her when she did not win the election? And the arrogance of her to say, oh, well, I think I won those debates. Yeah, but what did it do for you? If you're actually trying to make an argument that debates matter and that winning them was important, and yet you still lost, not to say that it didn't change some of where the votes are going, but I just don't know why you would look to a person who lost her election against Donald Trump and look to her for advice. Because I'll be honest, I went back and watched the middle debate and a little bit of the first debate between Hillary and Donald, and I forgot how much he interrupted her, and it was honestly kind of it was very abrasive. I forgot how much he was on the offense. He seems to have mellowed out, whether that's because he's just speaking slower, but he was attack dog. But she was also very schmarmy. And I put emphasis on schmarmy because goodness gracious, that little fake smile, that arrogance of, oh, well, I'm on the stage just because I have to be, not because I actually think he'll do anything. He's going to lose anyway. She had such an arrogance about her, and you can see it come through in this article as well. Now, that doesn't mean that she doesn't have good advice overall, because I think she is 100% right. You can very well rattle him. I think that Kamala Harris is going to have to do not that much, because it's Trump. He gets, I don't want to say rattled, but he gets passionate, involved, really invested very easily, so I don't think it'll be hard to rattle him. So I'm not trying to dismiss Hillary Clinton outright and say that she's not providing good advice, but it's just hilarious to me where we look towards the failed campaigns of the previous, just like people look to Mitt Romney to provide a little bit of advice or try to say, hey, look back towards the McCain era. Guess what? McCain lost. He had a lot of people on his side. McCain lost. There's obviously a cultural shift going on. The Democratic Party of today is not the Democratic Party of Hillary Clinton, no matter how much she would want that to be the case, and no matter how much the progressives in the party want to run away from that neocon consensus. And the party that elected Trump in 2016 is not the same party that's electing him in 2024. The rules of the road have changed. Let me just run back through it one more time. We had a presidential nominee drop out in the middle of July after a early debate, earlier than normally scheduled, in order to make sure that something was happening before the DNC. Then we had a presidential candidate shot at, an attempted assassination. Then we had immediately after that an entire RNC where They brought together members from they brought together people who are of the more union side of the party, a more populist side of the party. Then we saw the presidential nominee on the Democratic side step down. We saw Harris step up. We saw a DNC that was completely dismissive of the previous era of Joe Biden, putting him on the first night and throwing him out the door, and then trying to resonate with a 2008 consensus or a 2008 Obama bid. And we have gone through so much, honestly, within this last month and a half, within the last 2 months, because now I realize that it has been over 2 months, that this is a totally different ballgame. So while Hillary Clinton's advice is probably not bad, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has as much weight, and it should not be considered at the top of the list. Stick to your message, Kamala. I don't like a lot of Kamala Harris's policies, but if I'm giving her advice, stick to your message. What you're doing with the freedom, it works. What you're doing with throwing Trump underneath the bus on the prosecutions, calling him a criminal and trying to say he's just playing the same old game, that actually works. It makes people realize, yeah, hey, we're just doing the same thing. We want a new era here. I want to be the new defining message. And if you're Donald Trump, stay, like I said, with Kamala, don't love all the policies, but if I'm providing advice, stay on top of yourself. Learn a little bit of discipline like you had during the Biden debate. Calm. Relax. This is not a rally. This is not you in front of your base. This is you in front of everybody. The media chooses not to cover your rallies as much, except for some of the crazier things you say, because they learned. Last time they gave you, and even in 2020, they gave you too much free coverage. Now they have to give you coverage because it's a debate. Relax. At the end of the day, you're in control of your destiny. Don't be on the defensive. Be on the front foot, not the back foot. It's going to be hard. He's going to have to come out and define her again because he's been trying to do it for a while. He finally got a message coherent. But this is where a lot of people, the first presidential debate with the new candidates versus the old candidates, this is where he can step up and he can define her in a calm fashion, in a calm manner. I think he can come away with the win on this one. So that's just my hearted advice. And then again, I have only been watching politics for 7, 8, probably at this rate, 8 years in a very serious fashion. Plus, maybe like 9 years in a casual, with maybe an extra like 2 or 3 years in a casual fashion. So maybe like 10 to 11. But then again, I could be totally wrong. I just think leaning into the populism on either side is a fascinating trend, and I really think it shows that we are on a different, I don't want to say timeline, but we're in a different universe at this point than we were a few years ago. So any advice from the old mainstream, I don't know if some of it could work. I just don't know if it's going to be as warranted as some people would think, maybe Hillary Clinton herself and her self-importance. All right, so let's jump to our daily delight. This one comes from Miami Herald. Hearts melt as puppy tries to protect big sister from nail trim. And honestly, I don't really like TikToks, but this TikTok is adorable. You got a sister coming in, protecting, hey, get away from my sister. They even put little voiceovers over or I should say they put little text like subtitles up there trying to translate what the dog is saying. It is absolutely adorable. We love to see the kinship between these two dogs and protecting her older sister. So if you want to check out that video, or you want to read any of today's articles, there's a link in the description below, that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And don't forget to stop back by here or the RSS feed in order to listen to 6 and 6. It comes out on Tuesday and Thursday, 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.